I must honestly confess that in these latter days, as I begin my retirement, I am plagued by one crisis after another. I hope you will understand why I have this sense of crisis all the time. But in spite of all of them, I am still here and I am still endeavoring to preach day by day, week by week, whenever asked, whenever called. This is the third Sunday after the resurrection, or as the lectionary puts it, the fourth Sunday in the season of Easter. And here's the scripture from Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47. Listen to this. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. All came upon everyone because many wonders and signs were being done by the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. Breaking bread. Last week's gospel reading ended with these words. Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. The men who had made the trip to Emmaus did not come to an awareness of the identity of their strange traveling companion because of anything he had said, however profound. When Jesus broke bread to share it with them, suddenly their eyes had opened and they recognized, that is to say, they knew him. Let me say this again. What Jesus did made Jesus known to them before what Jesus had said. I think about this all the time, for I am a man of words, the kind of man whose whole life has been devoted to some form of speaking, either in a classroom, in public meetings, or from a pulpit in a church. I soon embraced my inclination to public declamation when I taught my first class of students at the urging of my graduate school professor who had chosen me as his teaching assistant. Throughout college and in my first 2 years of graduate school, I had struggled against a crippling shyness that impeded my participation in class discussions. I averted my gaze from the teacher when he or she surveyed the class for a respondent to any question. I feared speaking up in class because I anguished that everyone would discover that I was a fraud, that I had no real business to be in the class at all. So I kept my head down, took exacting and precise notes, and wrote my papers as I had ability to compose them. But C.D. Keyes, my professor in graduate school, had diagnosed my problem and decided to push me to break its spell, its hold over my future in the teaching career that could eventually be mine. You will teach one class period in my aesthetics course next semester, said he. I had months to prepare for one class period. And so I wrote out the whole of the 50-minute lecture, practiced delivering it in the bathroom mirror, timing myself to the second and then doing it over and over again and again. The day finally arrived, and I nervously watched as 30 students entered the room one by one and two by two. They cheerfully greeted each other as they awaited the introduction of the guest lecturer Dr. Keyes had promised for that day. I sat in a chair off to one side and near the podium. I felt dizzy and slightly nauseous, My mouth had become dry, and I thought I might puke if I even tried to say a single word. But then, the moment was upon me before I could bolt from the room. Dr. Keyes had told the class to listen carefully to what I would say. He explained to them that he had chosen me as his teaching assistant because of my way with words. What? What words does he mean? I kept asking myself. But now as I stood before the class, I began my prepared remarks, my lecture, and there was something in the eyes of those students I could see that made me relax and feel at ease. I had mildly jested at one point during the lecture, a jest at which I expected them to chuckle, and they laughed out loud. It confirmed for me that they were on my side, that they wanted me to succeed. So I pressed on, and before long, perhaps halfway through, my fears and anxieties about public speaking melted away like a vapor. I became bold and impetuous. I even left my script for a detour along a winding road before I returned to a fitting close. The students appeared to me to have been rapt by what I had attempted to disclose, and in their appreciation, they applauded lustily as Dr. Keyes beamed his approval. I was hooked. I had taken the risk to become a teacher, and it had worked, at least in one class period. But I had yet to experience the pull of another form of public speaking. Not long after my initial baptism by fire, a second calling came to me that I could not ignore. All preaching may involve some degree of teaching, but of this you may be certain. Not all teaching is preaching. Preaching required of me more than the speaking of words. Preaching, good preaching, requires the virtue of good deeds. Actions that enlarge our capacity for living, actions that take our broken world to make it whole, actions that address our hungers to make us full, to bring us healing, and to inflame our quest for joy. When I taught, I always did so as though what I was teaching would sustain my students for a life well lived. And it was common for me to ask them why they had bothered to enroll in any of my courses at all. And their responses were often hard-headedly practical, as in, well, I need this course for graduation. Or less often, they were curious about what they had heard about me, that I was slightly off my rocker and over the top in my manner of speaking. Neither of these reasons, I assured them, would ever truly satisfy them. They were underestimating the true value of the course, if that was all they really wanted. I wanted to share this context for what comes next. If words are not enough to open the eyes, to bring about realization and knowledge, then what is? I have taught for 46 years and I have preached for at least 37. Teaching is an honorable craft, a worthy labor that when well practiced gives the greater benefit to the students, a benefit in knowledge, training, and competence. Preaching, on the other hand, should save, redeem, and convert. Ouch! I say ouch because in all the time I have been preaching this man of words, I cannot say that I ever saved anyone at all. I am never confident in any year to report at an annual conference how many conversions occurred during my time of service in the previous year. I am much more confident that I never converted anyone, not one solitary soul. I would feel like a fraud to boldly assert that my preaching yielded a rich bumper crop of newly saved souls. So let me state the obvious. This is a church. But the church is not a classroom, though teaching does occur from time to time. As on an early Sunday morning when the students run amok in Liz's Sunday school class, despite her every effort to keep us focused on the lesson. On a Wednesday evening, I try my hand at opening the scriptures with the assistance of the 12 or so folks who show up on Zoom, from New York to Pittsburgh to Charlottesville and finally to Staunton. Teaching may go on in the church, but teaching is not the church. So what is the church? Like the teacher I have always been, I have made a rather circuitous route to get to the point at last. Does anyone remember the scripture with which I began this sermon? Oh, that. You've forgotten by now, I'm certain. But that scripture, it proves more valuable than we may have at first supposed. Luke's book, aptly called The Acts of the Apostles, not the sermons of the apostles, records that the early gathering of the folks that made up the first century church devoted themselves to the teaching of the apostles as part of it. But he quickly adds that they attended the fellowship. A week or so ago, the Board of Trustees at Mary Baldwin University celebrated President Fox's 20 years of service to the university. We gathered on the lawn in front of the main administration building to hear commendations from board members, from civic leaders, and distinguished persons in the life of our community. Later in the evening, we were invited to a reception featuring delicacies, hors d'oeuvres, crudités, and other assorted victuals, as my grandfather would have called them. But the main affair was a full 4-course meal in the Shenandoah Ballroom of the Hotel 24 South. What is fellowship without the breaking of bread? This is so obvious that we constantly overlook the importance of this one simple need, our collective need of bread. Luke states it emphatically that there was no church in which there was no breaking and sharing of bread. All came upon the people not because of what any of the apostles had said, but because of what they had done. The many signs and wonders they performed in the sight of the church. But then Luke returns our attention to how the people gathered in the temple for prayers, and I would add more importantly, how they broke bread with one another at home with glad and generous hearts. In the breaking of bread, the people praised and worshiped God in the breaking of bread. God added to their number day by day. In the breaking of bread, people came to believe and to rejoice in their faith. In the breaking of bread, the church grew and grew, convert by convert, soul by saved soul, sinner by sinner, saved by the grace of God, a grace first revealed in the breaking of bread. Our faith is a bread-centered faith. A storytelling faith, to be sure, but stories best told at table as we consume our daily bread. Our deepest prayer is for the bread we share daily, the fellowship sustained by the breaking of bread. At the risk of repeating myself from last week, my teaching days at college are behind me now. I am leaning into tomorrow with a burnished hope, a yearning to knead yeast, egg, flour, oil, and salt. I want to learn to bake challah. Can I learn? Will someone teach me? I hear the yes overhead. I hear the yes even before I see the one who offers to teach me how. I want to break the challah with my own hands, to serve it sacramentally. I want to see the power of God to convert the wayward, the lost, and the hungry in the breaking of that bread. Let our worship begin there and let it end there too. Tell me, can you hear it? The fellowship hall is calling us to table, to dining, to glad laughter, to community in the witness of miracles and signs. Set the tables, pull out the chairs, bless the food we all prepare. But please, 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 I implore you, let me break the bread and leave the conversions unto God. Amen.